everybody. Did you have a good lunch, a sandwich, meet one or two new friends in the arena? That's good. You've been stretching your legs, and now we're ready for a new session on our stage today. The story about our next speaker is quite amazing. He just flew in, actually, from UK to share his story about building up a new broadcast channel in Great Britain. The channel is 2 years old, it's brand new, and it's really entering the market for real. It can be #1 within a few years, maybe, in the UK. So let's welcome our next guest entrepreneur, Mark Schipper, on stage. Please welcome Mark.
Hello.
I have a startup question for you, Mark. Tell the audience and me, why are you here today?
The lovely weather, of course. No, we were talking about this before. This is my third startup, so I've done a few of these, and maybe you can see some of the arrows in my back. But what I was trying to do was to distill for you all some of my takeaways, and this one's been particularly interesting. So yeah, that's the main thing, to share anybody who's working on, whether it's a startup or growth or innovation, the world is changing so quickly. I thought I'd just give you some takeaways and do with it what you will, but
that's a brilliant idea.
Exactly.
I'll leave the stage for you, Mark.
Okay, good, good. Now, how does this work? This is a clicker. Woohoo! Excellent. Right, so I'm Mark. We've got about half an hour, and yeah, I'm going to just talk you through the kind of concept behind and the story of the growth of GB News. Now, everything's connected is the theme of this conference. I always think that's important, but the subline is the importance of managing platforms, users, data. So I think our case study is quite helpful in that regard, because we use data and analytics all the time to drive our decision making. The next thing I do is I think about, where are we? Well, we're in Odense, and again, I think that's really relevant, because it's the home of Hans Christian Andersen. And he wrote many wonderful fairy tales, but one of them is The Ugly Duckling. And again, I actually think that's very apt for GB News, as I think at the end of this 25 minutes or so, you might realize. So I'm quite excited to tell you about GB News. We've already done the next bit, a little bit about me, just so you understand. So I've worked for a bunch of big companies. Here we go. Mainly in media and tech. I've raised lots of capital. As I said, this is my third startup. I've also unusually done, hang on, here we go. I've produced a whole bunch of movies. So I spent about 12, 13 years making movies. Some of these you might recognize. So I come at this, I've produced 3 plays. So that gives me a slightly different perspective than most broadcast professionals. And I've taken all of that into GB News. One thing that many people probably don't know is I've actually been involved in GB News since 2018, 5 years ago almost. Just volunteering before it was even an idea. I helped raise all the capital, created the plan, so again been there, done that, got the t-shirt, still standing. So the first lesson that I take away from all of this is aptly encapsulated by this quote by Michael Arrington, I think he was the founder of TechCrunch, a guru. Startups are really very hard, very, very hard. Anything that you plan, just assume that it'll take at least twice as long as you think it's going to take. It'll be twice as hard, and quite frankly, GB News was no exception. If anything, I think those 2s were probably 4s or 5s for us. It was 5 times as hard, and it took, actually, it was probably 1. We did it in the speed we wanted to. The sacrifices by the team have been absolutely enormous. And I would say, as with many startups, that some people couldn't handle it, and finding that out was hard for both us and them together. But hopefully we all got a lot stronger from that. Now, stepping back from it, we've already achieved the impossible. We've got this thing up and running in record speed, as you'll see, and we're growing. and we've done it at a fraction of the cost and the time it would take any other classic broadcaster to even think about doing this. So our first goal was to survive. And we've done that. And now we've got a slightly more ambitious goal. You can fill in other A's if you feel like it. The audacious is the kind of the pre-watershed version of that particular acronym. We will be the #1 news channel in the UK 5 years from now. Does that sound ambitious? Yep, sure. That's why it's audacious, right? But is it impossible? We really don't think so, given the green shoots we're seeing. And quite frankly, at GB News, we're very, very used to achieving the impossible. We do it absolutely all the time. So enough of an introduction. So this is kind of what I wanted to take you through. The first bit is editorial, which is different, very different. The next bit is really about the kind of more management consultant. What's the actual business vision behind all of this when you've talked about the editorial? We talk a bit about the reception, both by our competitors, our lovely competitors, and more importantly about the audience. Then I wanted to take you through that mad first 6 months in 2021 when we built this thing and got it on air. And then I'll just have some wrap-up thoughts and there'll be some time for Q&A. So without further ado, the editorial position of GB News. So on the face of it, GB News is just like any other rolling news channel. We have news bulletins, weather reports every half hour. In between, we've got current affairs programming, debate, comment. But underneath, we are very, very different. And we have to be, because the UK is one of the most sophisticated media markets in the whole world. And quite frankly, the competition is absolutely awesome. BBC News, Sky News are formidable. Just think about the newspapers, The Sun, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, all the other News UK brands, Reach Group, they're world-beating operations. So we absolutely had to be different. And we definitely believe that we've done that. And how have we done that? We've embraced the future. One of my favorite movies, Back to the Future, right? But the future, both in terms of the way we interact with our audience, the technology choices we've made, even this business vision, this kind of McKinsey style, well, how do you make money? How does it all work together? And just the workflows. And we'll take you through all of that. So just some why I got a call in the summer of 2018 from my dear friend Mark Schneider saying, Schipper, I need your brains on this issues TV thing. And so why was that even an issue? Well, we did a whole bunch of research, and you can see them here on screen. But the main point was that the last broadcast TV news station in the UK was launched 34 years ago, Sky News. And since then, the classic 24-hour news cycle has settled into a very recognizable, predictable pattern, repetitive, you might even say. And even Sky, that was a disruptor, fell into that pattern. And our pre-launch program really showed that people were fed up with that. So let's just read this out. So 71% of adults believed there was too much negativity and scaremongering. 73% wanted a news channel that offered a range of views, that allowed people, the audience, to make up their own mind, as opposed to being told, here's what you have to think. And 64% believed that TV coverage was too one-sided. It's kind of two sides of the same story. So that's why we thought there's an opportunity here editorially. So the next slide is just a promo. We're a TV company, there needs to be a bit of video here, right? So this gives you a really good flavor of our presenters, what we're trying to do, which really is disrupting that traditional model of addressing a passive audience with, here's what you have to think. So I'll just run this and then I'll have some other thoughts about it.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel, sort of find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So that gives you a sense of it's a warmer approach, chattier, slightly more irreverent, authentic, very proudly British. You will see there in the logo, we got the flag in it. That drew howls of ire. That apparently was not allowed. You're not allowed to be proud of the British flag. Personally, I'm Dutch. I love orange. Okay, that's a very weird thing, but I love it. I'm proud of it. And the hope is that we're not shouty, not divisive. We are definitely opinionated, because a good opinion kickstarts a debate. And the other thing I want you to take away from this is this concept of being the people's channel, and I'll come back to that in a number of ways. That's very important. The next slide really just goes through our editorial mission. We have an editorial charter that sets this all out. One of the key things, so our holding company is called All Perspectives Limited, and that's no accident, because the whole point of it is, here's an issue and we want all perspectives on it, within reason, obviously. And this concept of diversity, in our mind, diversity is diversity of opinion, diversity of creed, diversity of background. Regionally, it could be as well. And so there's really four things that this breaks down into. First of all, we've talked a bit about the inclusion of all perspectives. So we don't have a single editorial line on any issue. The point is, you should try to highlight at least both sides. Maybe there's 3 or 4 sides to a story. Let's try to ventilate those in longer form debates. So there's a lot of discussion. We take it slower. We give people, whether they're Just Stop Oil, people might say, oh, they never come on. They love coming on, because we give them time to talk about what their issues are. And yes, our presenters might disagree with them, but it makes for awesome television. And my unofficial strapline for GB News is, it's healthy to disagree. Because that is the basis of the scientific principle, right? Here's what I think, you disagree because here's the data. So that's the point. The point about discussion also is that there's another phrase that we try to live by, which is we don't try to talk at people, we try to talk with them, if you see what I'm saying. And so we include the audience in everything we try to do. And we try to include them without them having a fear of being cancelled. That's happening everywhere. You're not allowed to talk about certain things. So a lot of issues are not off limits for us, as long as they're handled respectfully. The final thing here is non-metropolitan points of view. Now, that phrase is very particularly chosen. It's actually not a geographical limit. We have lots of viewers in places like London and Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, Glasgow. It's more of an attitude. And every capital city in the world seems to be slightly different than the rest of the country. It thinks differently, it behaves differently. And so what we're really trying to give a voice to is people who don't think that way. In the UK, that happens to be about 86% of the population. And so therefore, we feel that we're facilitating, trying to at least, the national conversation. And the final bit is, we are very proudly regulated by the broadcast regulator Ofcom. If they feel we've done something wrong, they'll come tell us. But really, that's because we try to hold ourselves to the highest journalistic standards. And that's what that is. I wanted to show you one other clip, which is more about the programming rather than promos, if you will. So this is something we did last Thursday. So last Thursday in the UK, the government was forced to announce that net migration for the 12 months to the 25th of May was 600,000 net migration. 600,000 people came into the UK. And that's an issue that more than 60% of the population, of the entire population, that's a top 3 issue for them. And so we went out to a place called Boston, there we go, not in the US, but actually in the UK, which sometimes is discussed as the home of Brexit, if you will. And we just had 2 presenters out there on the street with 2 camera people and 2 producers. We didn't have sat trucks, We didn't have auto cue. We didn't have hair and makeup specialists. That's the attitude. Just get on and do it. So I'm going to show you this, and then let's talk a little bit more about it.
This, of course, is our net migration specialist. This is Boston, or at least a part of it anyway.
What we voted for has backfired.
You don't see many locals about anymore.
Do you feel as though you've got what you asked for?
No, not at all.
From my point of view, yes. From a business point of view.
This was to campaign just to get a referendum.
Just to get a referendum.
We need people like Nigel to grab it, come on, lead the country.
They tell us at elections what they want us to hear, but they never actually really mean it.
We're proud to be GB News, Britain's news channel.
So, that's a challenging topic, right? And many other media wouldn't touch it. And yet, this is something that, as I said, more than 60% of the entire population feels really strongly about. And as you could see from that clip, there's a couple of things. One, we were out there for most of the day, trying to get as many viewpoints as possible, and opinions were divided. You know, there's lots of people think that actually this was the wrong decision to have made. There was a big invitation there to join the debate digitally. That's a classic thing. It's not just people on the street. We try to kind of get people engaged. And it ended up in a classic British pub for a further debate, broadcast live over the internet. So that really is emblematic of editorial, what we're trying to achieve. Yes, we absolutely will cover very challenging topics head on, because quite frankly, the best solution to speech you disagree with is not to cancel it, it's more speech. Scientific principle. Yes, we've hired a few Brexiteers. You saw Nigel Farage there. He's certainly a polarizing figure of that. And yes, we let ordinary people have their say in many, many different ways, and we're trying to figure out better ways, more ways of doing that, because it just makes for great content. And quite frankly, that's exactly where the opportunity was, because so many people felt that most of the other media choices weren't speaking for them, that they were, quite frankly, left of center. And that, therefore, was where the opportunity was editorially. And it's about plurality, because ultimately, the more voices you have, again, respectfully, legal, that has to be good for democracy, to have both points of view ventilated. And so that's really what we set out to do. So now I'm going to give you the kind of McKinsey style. Okay, so how is this all supposed to make money? The key ingredients. So we see ourselves very much as a 21st century publisher, and there's really a few building blocks there. The first thing is you start with stories and the personalities that bring those stories to life that people engage with and connect with. You then create a whole bunch of content around those stories. And that 360-degree point is super important, because this is not a broadcaster. You know, and I'll come back to that, I'll unpack that, because it's really important about how we think about this. So you create a bunch of content, you then start sharing that with people, they interact with it, and in doing that, you create a community of people. And really, the key point here is to have them interact with each other. It's not so much them talking to you or us talking back to them, it's them talking to each other. Because in those interactions, you create tons and tons and tons of data. That is fundamental to everything that we do. And we're actually very, very unusually, very open about the data with our staff, right down to the most junior runner. They know our television ratings. They can see what's happening digitally. And it gives context around the decisions that we're making. And obviously, when you put all of that together, you can actually generate revenue off that. And we haven't really even started. So that is kind of the business concept of it. A couple of slides on this content creation, because it's really important to understand. So that 360-degree concept, the first thing is we were introduced as a broadcaster. We don't think of ourselves as a broadcaster at all. The way we think of ourselves is a content creation machine that's video native, that happens to broadcast. Yes, we broadcast. TV, we have a national radio channel as well. Lots of digital outlets, owned and operated, social. And this bottom one is super important, that IRL, in real life, events. that experiential concept. And as you see, broadcasting from a pub, which we do at least once every other week, really sets that tone. And there's lots of other stuff that we're planning and doing in that regard. But at the center of it all are the stories and the personalities. And that's how you unify everything, because what we're trying to make sure is that no silos are created. We don't want, here, oh, I just do television, I just do broadcast. No, I just do digital. It has to all be one, because otherwise you're inefficient. And quite frankly, digital can feed broadcast and broadcast can feed digital. And we're seeing that already. So that allows you to adopt a rapid test and learn approach. I'll come back to that because we definitely think much more and act much more like a tech company, a tech startup, than a classic broadcaster. We're not afraid to throw something out there. Oh, well, that didn't work. Fine, let's not do that. That thing, that worked? Right, let's do more of that. So that's what we're about. One final point about this. These complementary engagement models. So broadcast, what is that? That's really your megaphone, right? It's one-to-many, and it creates immediate awareness. It also creates a sense of, oh, this is a real grown-up proposition, if you will. It's on telly. It's on radio. Digital, as I talked about, many-to-many, creates lots of word of mouth, creates the ability to interact, generates data. It also allows you to test. Why should new content only be launched on the broadcast channel? There's all kinds of formats you can play with and have fun with digitally. So that is our laboratory. And then the events. Why do I keep coming back to that? Because it is fundamental, having produced plays, immersive experiences. I've seen it firsthand, how powerful this is. What that is, it's the scarcity. Think of yourselves. You've gone to a music concert or, I don't know, a wine tasting session. What's the first thing you probably do, unless you're not allowed to, unless your phone is locked into one of those magnetic bags? You take a picture of yourself and you say, look at me. And you stream it out to all your social followers. And that is word of mouth. And really, it's that because of the scarcity and because it's in real life, it creates that emotional connection. And therefore, you're creating a bunch of brand ambassadors who will evangelize about your brand. So really, I love theater. That's why I had to put that there. But it's about the emotional connection. That's the point I'm trying to make. Right, our reception. This is a fun one, or not. So how has our reception been in Britain? It really depends on who you ask. Startups are rarely welcomed by incumbents. No one likes competition. No one likes to be made to look old-fashioned or out of touch. And then, when you start attracting their audience, oh my God, they really hate you. They want to nip you in the bud. And that certainly has been our experience. So a couple of slides on some headlines. So these headlines are just around when we launched. They were dismissive. And I guess the incumbents were wishfully thinking we'd go away. News UK launched Talk TV, fronted by Piers Morgan, who they paid some ungodly amount of money every year, basically to kill us. You know, and actually, to be fair, the first 6 months, we gave them plenty of ammunition, particularly as we iterated our technology solution, we bedded it in. There were reasons for it, but we were doing it in plain sight. So but we did iterate. We didn't go away. We used the data to test, learn, iterate, try again, and move. And so 2 years later, the tone of the headlines has massively changed. There's basically almost unbridled outrage that we even exist, that we even dare to talk about things in a certain way. And this is a funny one. So we have entire sections called GB News on at least The Times, The Guardian, The Mirror, and The Telegraph. What's the latest thing these crazy guys are up to? And that is a neat segue into the second law of startups, which is very similar to Newton's third law of motion, which is that basically every action has an equal and opposite counter-reaction, right? And so really, those cries of objection and outrage are a normal part of a successful startup because it shows that you're touching a nerve, that you are a threat, that it's working, quite frankly, and that is demonstrated by the data. So now we flip to the audience because our audience is really growing very fast. Now, on television, our audience is up 36% year on year. Our digital audience, 300%. And I can tell you that knowing what I know about the month of May, we've just blown these numbers out of the water again. Obviously, we've had in television, we've had a coronation, but it's, that's not just that. And the other thing that I will say is that what's never mentioned behind these headlines that are outraged is that, one, all these other outlets are harvesting our content on an industrial scale. Every month, between 500 and 1,500 bits of our content are basically ripped and repurposed in articles and videos elsewhere. In fact, Jeff Marsh, our chief digital officer, was the chief digital officer of the Reach Group and the Express. The reason we hired him, because he was better at clipping our content than we were. So we said, right, we'll have you on our team. Yeah, so they're ripping our content, which must mean that it does something for the audience and traffic. They're quietly copying us. The number of discussion-based formats on other channels has markedly increased in the last 2 years. And we've definitely moved the Overton window. So if you think back to that, that clip I showed you about Boston, Migration Nation, both main political parties in the UK now have stopping the small boats as a manifesto promise. Now, you may disagree or agree with that, but that's the point. At least you're having a discussion about it, and then it goes into the realm of politics. So another point here is that this is that last Thursday. So this is just a 15-minute television share. And on that day, we beat Sky News for over 5 hours. We beat the BBC News for over 7 hours. And we reached our BHAG for 2 hours, 2 whole hours. And you might say, well, that's a one-off. It doesn't happen. This is increasingly happening. In fact, if I look at the numbers for Monday and Tuesday of this week, yesterday, oh my God. I think yesterday we'd hit our BHAG for 4 hours, 4.5 hours. So it's working. And what you're not seeing here is that our website, for instance, is now really starting to gain traction. Last month, we surpassed the newspaper in terms of traffic from a standing start. It's not a massive brand, but it is certainly a top 30 brand. So we're now in the top 30, being number 200 or something. And we've done it all at warp speed with a fraction of the staff and a minuscule marketing budget. So some fun and games about, so how did you do this? I see some of the members of the fun group here, that you were right there with us. But let's think back to 2021, or maybe you've all forgotten because you really, that was quite a bad year. So 2021, you had something called COVID. We were in a national lockdown that was gently stepping down. That had impact on our supply chain as well. We obviously had to order a whole bunch of kit, and that had to then be delivered. We had from the 1st of January new Brexit lovely customs restrictions. So everything that we were even able to order took weeks and weeks and weeks to spring out of customs. We hired 120 up to 150 people on Zoom in the space of about 2 months. And really, the other thing is, we only got our lease for our studio done in April, early April, granted, and we got our Series A funding done, so the real money came in early April. And we launched 2.5 months later. Now, how is that even possible? It's absolutely insane. Really, we built this place. We had some preparatory work done, but the way we did it was we basically got a minimal viable product out there, again, thinking like a tech company, and then you see all these bars here. Ongoing, iteration. We only had one control room. The studio was half built. We didn't really have office. All that got built after we launched. But that's the point. Just get out there, get your product out there, get audience and data, and then iterate. Here's a quick picture. This is what our studio looked like in April 2021. Completely empty. There was no internet. There was no fiber connection. That got installed in May. It's quite hard to calibrate cloud-native systems when you don't have internet. It had the wrong glass. This was funny. So when we finally turned the cameras on, it looked like we were in Finding Nemo. It looked like we were under the sea. So we had to test hundreds of rolls of film to see, pink and green. There was no power, not enough for a newsroom or a television station anyway, no backup power supply, no air conditioning, no physical security because nobody was in the office. And And the funniest one, actually, there's two, this is right near Paddington Station, there's 2 underground lines running under this building. And we were trying to listen, because we're in the aptly named lower ground floor, AKA the basement. We were trying to listen as to whether we could hear the tube lines. And the problem was that because of COVID, they weren't running. So we sat there, we knew there was a couple of tube lines an hour. We sat there for hours listening. Did you hear that? Oh no, that was the elevators. Anyway, quite fun. How do you get people to work together who've never met? They're all professionals. They're all really good at what they do in technology, in production, as broadcasters. But how do you rehearse when you don't have a studio, when that's still being built? So we hired the ballroom at the Paddington Hilton. Now, luckily, that was quite cheap those days, because nobody had use for hotels. I think it was £8,000 for the month. And essentially what we did is we divided, you can see 4 tables there. We divided the room into kind of breakfast, morning, daytime, prime time, just like you would in the broadcast day. And we started rehearsing as well as we could. But the actual studio rehearsal time prior to launch was probably less than 10 whole days. Yeah, so quite fun. Building the plane while flying it, right? That's the point. But we wanted to get that minimum viable product out there, get the iteration going. And that was particularly because we set ourselves a really, really high bar from a technology and operations perspective. So we wanted to build the most modern newsroom in the world. We wanted to put journalists at the heart of everything they did, less back office. It needed to be story-centric for the reason I talked about. That's the only way to integrate your broadcasting, your digital, and your events business. And we wanted to do it faster, cheaper, and simpler than any legacy system. And while it wasn't easy to actually do all of this, shout out to, I think, one of your sponsors, it does work. It does work. But it's not been easy. We've had to overcome a litany of problems. And I just wanted to kind of, I thought this was probably a good slide. There's a whole bunch of things that we did wrong. Hand up. So maybe you don't have to make those mistakes. So the first thing is, understand your team. You know, startups, innovation, it's really hard. It takes a certain type of person to be able to cope with the old age adage of change being the only constant. The other big one for me anyway is, one of the hats I wear as CFO as well, can people solve problems creatively without applying money? When you create a business and the only thing you do is you just throw money at a problem, you're doomed to fail. And that is a really important element here. You know, and as I said before, lots of people have left us because they couldn't hack it or culture didn't fit or whatever it was. But we've ended up with a really interesting combination of people who could hack it, really young people who just had energy and were just really smart, and just outsiders. I think we're probably one of the bigger employers in the UK of comedians who do quite a lot of broadcasting for us. Newspaper journalists who've retrained as being faces on TV. It's been great after 2 years. So the next one is, you really do need to get people together in a room, because you can't expect to hire a bunch of high flyers and expect them to fly information from day one. It's not going to happen. So there's no substitute for face-to-face contact. This whole working from home thing in a creative industry, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work. You need to be together. How can you do anything creative? And by the way, I count innovation as creativity as well, because it's the water cooler moment where somebody goes, did you hear that? And that sparks something else. It's riffing off each other. It's really hard to do in 2D, to be honest. Now, if you embrace something new, try to be second cab off the rank. There's so many issues we encountered, like the system didn't quite scale the way we thought. My bugbear, this is all cloud-centric, so that also means you can get hacked, right? Vladimir Putin probably would like nothing better than to hack us. So you have massive firewalls. And then the interaction and the calibration of all the firewall rules to actually allow these cloud-native systems that constantly want to speak to each other and create massive holes through your firewall. How do you actually make that work? But man, that took probably until December 2021 to figure out. We did figure it out, but every time we kind of added in a new subsystem, it cascaded through and we had to start again. And the final one, this is a personal one, try to document what you do and actually create your training materials, because in our rush to get our MVP out there, quite frankly, documentation wasn't quite on our mind. We just didn't have the brain space for it because we were working 20-hour days, 7 days a week. But if you can do that, that's awesome, and we got there in the end. Now, some final thoughts. You know, it's been a whirlwind, right? We have encountered so many problems. We have to think through so many things, innovate our way out of problems that we never even thought existed. Was it worth it? We definitely think so, because this is the people's channel, and the people absolutely love us, and I've got the data to prove it. So we are, as of last week, the UK's most loved, that's not most respected, it's most loved news brand. We were #2 9 months after we launched, so now just 1 year and 9 months later, we're #1. Look at that. That is absolutely amazing. Now, we're not going to win any industry awards anytime soon because the industry kind of doesn't like us. But when people vote, they vote for us. And to me, having invested in a bunch of startups, done a bunch of things, essentially what we're creating is a new consumer brand. And the best investors in B2C venture capital will tell you that the first and the last piece of diligence they do has nothing to do with financials. It's things like Net Promoter Score, those passion metrics. Do you have an engaged audience? And, oh my God, we are absolutely smashing it. We're killing it. So that really was my final thought. Q&A.
Well, Mark, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions.
2?
Because, yeah, we might have a lot, but just to sum it up quickly. Mark, you said you are the people's channel. And I've been working in TV2 Denmark, which bring people all the time on television. Debates, discussions, inclusions. The words that you're speaking about, we have that as well. So tell me, what is the difference between what you would bring in a story and what BBC, for instance, will bring? I mean, what's the big difference when it comes down to the product?
I think it's the attitude. We genuinely don't mind. As you saw on that clip, we don't mind sending a presenter with no hair and makeup, 1 camera crew, and a microphone that ideally has GB News branded on it, talking to people. You would never see that. And we try to integrate all of that into our programming more and more. So it's being on the road, being on the road without a sat truck, trying to incorporate the popular voice in, and thinking of that as a format opportunity. I think, look, there's a whole bunch of stuff we have up our sleeves that I'm not going to talk about, but it's quite fun. And what you basically see is us more and more being out there. I mean, any pub that has 20 megabits a second of internet connectivity that's stable, we can broadcast from.
Yeah, so it's interacting with people. Tell me, last thing, the most popular documentary or show or program that you have, why is it a success? Tell me that.
Well, our #1 rated show, 7 p.m. Monday to Friday, is the Farage Show. He has a following, although interestingly, we have a number of other shows that are actually doing really well. Why is that so? I mean, and all the shows, by the way, that are popular is because they're talking about, it comes back to that concept of there are almost no issues that are just automatically ruled out. And it's about talking about those issues, ideally from both sides of the fence. That's really important. And then integrating the people's voice again. And I genuinely think that, love him or hate him, Nigel, the best moments are when he's talking for 10, 12 minutes with somebody who fundamentally and vehemently disagrees with him. It's awesome
but it's
content.
Good talk.
It's good content.
Good debate.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.